Pawn Stars boss Rick Harrison buys James Bond's credit card after paying a fortune for it. Rick Harrison, the sharp-talking owner of the world-famous gold and silver pawn shop in Las Vegas, had seen just about everything cross his counter. From vintage guitars to rare coins, military memorabilia to celebrity artifacts, nothing really surprised him anymore. But when an unassuming man walked through the door one afternoon, holding what he claimed was James Bond's credit card, even Rick raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious?" Rick asked, squinting at the man. "I'm dead serious," the man replied, placing a sleek black envelope on the glass countertop. "This is the actual credit card used by James Bond himself. MI6 issued. Used it back in the 80s. Rick looked down at the envelope like it might explode. "You're telling me this is the James Bond 007? The man nodded confidently. "Exactly. This isn't just any prop. It's real. And I want cash for it." Rick leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He knew that stories like this usually ended up being smoke and mirrors, but something about this guy's demeanor made him pause. He opened the envelope carefully and pulled out a small, worn plastic card. It was black with silver lettering, no photo, no hologram, just simple text. There was no magnetic strip, no chip, no contactless tap feature. It looked more like a government ID than a credit card. But the craftsmanship was undeniable. This wasn't your average fake. Rick turned to his longtime partner in business and wisdom, Corey Harrison, who had been quietly observing from the side. "What do you think?" Rick asked. Corey picked it up and examined it closely. "Looks legit." "But come on, how are we supposed to verify this? There's no database for MI6 credit cards." "That's where you're wrong," the seller interjected. "I've got documentation. A sealed file from the British Foreign Office. It proves this card was issued under Bond's cover identity during his time as an active field agent." Rick stared at him. "Let me see it." The man handed over a thick manila envelope stamped with red wax seals and official insignias. Rick broke the seal carefully and began flipping through pages filled with classified-looking documents, photos, and coded entries. One page showed a photograph of a younger Sean Connery, so it seemed, but the name listed next to it was not Connery, but rather, "This is insane," Rick muttered. "There's more," the man said. Attached to the account were expenses from around the world. Hotel stays in Monte Carlo, flights on Air Force One level jets, payments to weapons dealers, even purchases from high-end tailors like Tom Ford and Brioni. Rick whistled low. "That sounds like Bond all right." He looked at Corey again. "We can't price this like normal stuff. This is either the greatest con job ever or the most valuable piece of pop culture history since Marilyn Monroe's dress sold for millions." Corey shrugged. "Well, if it's real, it's worth every penny." Rick turned back to the seller. "How much do you want for it?" The man took a deep breath. $5 million. Rick nearly choked. $5 million, Rick repeated. "You heard me right. This card has historical value, entertainment value, cultural significance. If it hits the auction block, it'll go for double that." Rick rubbed his chin. "All right, let's say I believe you. Let's say this is real. How do I know it's not stolen property or tied to some international incident?" The man smirked. "Because the file includes a letter from M herself, dated March 1985, authorizing the decommissioning of the card following Bond's temporary retirement after the events in Gibraltar." Rick looked at Corey, stunned. "M in the movies." "Like in the real thing," the man said. "Or as close as you're ever going to get." Rick stood up and paced behind the counter. He knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but also a huge risk. If this turned out to be fake, he'd be out millions. If it was real, though we'll need to have this verified, Rick said finally, by experts. Forensic analysis, document authentication, maybe even someone from the UK intelligence community. I anticipated that, the man said, pulling out another folder. Here are the contacts for 2 retired MI6 agents, 1 former CIA liaison, and a historian from the V, and a museum in London who specializes in Cold War espionage materials. Rick flipped through the names. They all looked legitimate. All right, Rick said, let's make this happen. Over the next few weeks, the card went through a battery of tests. Forensic labs in Los Angeles and London analyzed the paper, ink, and plastic composition. Experts confirmed the materials matched those used by British intelligence in the 1980s. Document examiners compared the handwriting in the files to known samples from MI6 officials of that era. Everything checked out. Then came the biggest test, reaching out to the contacts provided. To everyone's surprise, one of the retired MI6 agents agreed to speak on condition of anonymity. In a secure video call, the agent confirmed that yes, such cards did exist for high-ranking operatives. They weren't regular credit cards, the agent explained. More like access tokens, used primarily for covert operations, off-the-books transactions, and maintaining false identities. Rick listened intently, recording every word. When the final report came back, it was conclusive. The card was authentic. Whether it was Bond specifically could never be 100% proven without DNA testing, which they couldn't do, but the evidence strongly supported the claim. Rick was convinced. He called the seller. It's real. The man didn't react with excitement, just a quiet nod. I told you. Rick arranged the transfer of $5 million via encrypted wire transfer. Within hours, the card and its accompanying files were officially part of the gold and silver pawn shop's private collection. Word of Rick's acquisition spread fast. Within days, collectors, journalists, and fans were clamoring for a look. Rick decided to host a special exhibition at the pawn shop, turning the back room into a mini-museum dedicated to the card and its mysterious origins. He invited historians, filmmakers, and even Daniel Craig, who had played Bond in several films, to view the artifact. Craig reportedly spent over an hour examining the card and documents, later calling it one of the most fascinating pieces of cinematic and real-world espionage I've ever seen. Media outlets around the world covered the story. CNN, BBC, Times, Rolling Stone all wanted a piece of the action. The hashtag Bond card trended globally on social media, but not everyone believed it was real. Skeptics argued that MI6 would never issue a credit card to a field agent, especially one with such an obvious identifier as 007. Others speculated that it was a prop from one of the older Bond films, perhaps. Rick, however, stood firm. If you don't believe it, that's fine, he told reporters. But I've spent my whole life dealing in rare and unusual items. I know the difference between a fake and the real deal. This is the real deal. In the months that followed, the card became a symbol of intrigue, mystery, and the blurred line between fiction and reality. Museums offered millions to borrow it for exhibits. Filmmakers reached out asking to use it in future Bond movies. Rick refused them all. This isn't just a collectible, he told in an exclusive interview. It's a piece of history, a window into a world most people will never understand. I'm not selling it, I'm preserving it. He donated the card and its supporting documents to the newly established housed in a climate-controlled vault beneath the pawn shop. Visitors could view it through bulletproof glass, with rotating exhibits featuring other spy-related artifacts acquired over the years. And in true Rick Harrison fashion, he added a personal touch. Next to the display case was a plaque engraved in gold. Years later, long after Rick Harrison had retired and passed the shop on to his son, the legend of James Bond's credit card lived on. Some still insisted it was a hoax. Others believed it was the closest thing humanity would ever get to proof that 007 was more than just a character. Rick, now in his 70s, often sat in the corner of the museum sipping coffee, watching tourists marvel at the card. When asked what he thought, he always gave the same answer: "I don't care if it's real or not. What matters is that it made people believe in something bigger than themselves, and that's priceless."